Hi everyone, so I'm here on the Heart Centered Visionaries YouTube channel, and today I've got the lovely Romina to interview, which I'm super excited about. So welcome Romina, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's great. And you're in Australia, you're in Sydney, aren't you? Yeah, the same
Yes.
world
Yeah.
for me. So
Yes. Totally opposite.
yeah.
Opposite everything.
Yeah, it's so confusing that I always get confused with the weather. So you're saying you're in summer and we're in winter in the UK, so it's always
Yep.
completely
And
different.
it's nighttime here.
Yeah, yeah. Morning here. So anyway, still getting my head around these time zones. But so so just a little intro about Romina and we'll get stuck in. So Romina is a writer and content creation coach, and she works with soulful women to draw out the essence of their message or intention to basically help them create that vision in their businesses. So, and I really love what you do because I feel that you bring your intuition into it, and it's yeah, just that soulful way of working. Because I think a lot of creative women, particularly, can relate to myself. We have so many ideas, and we just don't know how to channel them. So I love the way that you can, help people get clarity on what they're doing. So, and just to add as well, Romina has a beautiful podcast, which I've been on, called Alchemy of Alignment Podcast, where she interviews lots of incredible women in business. So that's definitely worth checking out. So anyway, on that note, to dive into the work that you do, I'd love to know a bit more about actually what led you into working in this business and creating a business for yourself.
Okay. Well, it kind of started after I was made redundant from my last role in a corporate um, company. And I'd always worked with content, but never really in a way that I felt aligned with. It was always sort of I'd go in and this was my role, and then it would sort of transform into something else and slowly get away from what I really wanted to do every time, right? Every time. And the last one was particularly extreme in terms of what I'd started out doing there and what I ended up doing before I left. And I think I manifested this redundancy because really I was ready to leave
Uh,
after about 7 years um, from that place, which I mean, I loved my team, but the work was just really draining and, it challenged me in all the wrong ways. And I felt constantly, nervous about, am I going to do a good job today? Or, second guessing myself and my knowledge and things. And I thought this is really not a good environment for me to be in. So I left after this redundancy. And after a few months of, just having fun with my son and resting and various things, I started thinking about what do I want to do, because the job applications that I had been doing weren't really going far and they weren't really something I would have been 100% happy doing anyway.
yeah.
So I kind of stopped applying to jobs. And then one day I was staying at my parents' place because I'd actually broken my ankle and sprained the other one at the same, like in the same incident. And so I was wearing these two moon boots, and I lived in an apartment at the time on the third floor, so I
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
I couldn't go home. Um, so my son and I were staying there with them for a few weeks, and my dad asked, oh, how's the job hunt going? And I was like, well, I kind of given up for now because I just, can't find anything that I feel is right for me, and I wasn't willing to compromise anymore on things that were important to me, like the flexibility to work around my son and not having to work in like on site all the time and things like that. And I couldn't find anything. And he said, oh, weren't you talking about doing freelance
Mm,
writing for a while? And it was something that I'd sort of revisited every now and then, thinking one day I'll do that. And then, I came out with all the excuses of, it's not, it's financially secure and, various things. And he just looked at me and he's like, you don't have a job right now. So it's not really that risky to try that. So that's kind
yeah.
of how it started. It was really quite abrupt. And there was literally no planning involved in starting it. I just said, okay, I'm going to be a freelance writer. And I made a website and somehow managed to get 2 clients without really doing anything.
Wow.
Um,
Love that.
so,
That's
which was,
alignment.
it was so aligned that one of the clients was a college that I was starting a little course at. I'm really interested in aromatherapy, and I was doing a little sort of introductory course in that. And it was really funny. And I felt a little bit like I was reading the course materials, and something popped out at me as like a word that was repeated, and anyway. So I said, oh, this is my background, and I've come up with this error in the learning materials. And I just thought, because I also have worked in learning materials development for tertiary education and for in-house sort of user training documentation. So it's kind of like my my background. And I thought, well, I can't not say anything. So I emailed them, and then I thought, maybe that comes across as a bit obnoxious. So I actually, they called me about something else related to my enrollment. And then I just said, look, I wanted to explain my email because I feel a little bit like I didn't want to come across as obnoxious. And this led to a conversation about what I do. And they happened to be looking for someone to outsource their blogging to. So it was just like these random connections that led to my first clients, which was really amazing. And I thought, wow, this is obviously the right step for me. And that's how I started. I just started doing freelance, mostly blog writing.
I love that.
Yeah.
No,
but quickly I realized that it wasn't quite what I wanted to be doing. And that's sort of how I started exploring, I guess, after a few months of being in business, just purely as freelance writing. And that's how I ended up where I am now.
Brilliant. I just love that, because I know that obviously, like, the redundancy probably at the time you're thinking, oh gosh, but it's like, to me, that's like the universe was nudging you to something else, because then maybe you would be where you are now if you hadn't have followed those steps.
Yeah.
And, I love it, the synchronicities that open up when you're on the right path, get money, being paid for what you're meant to do. So that's beautiful. And so I love that it just kind of flowed and manifested, it seemed like, naturally for you. So
it did.
And you've been doing this, is it a year now? I think you've been in business
a little over a year. I started in September last year, so it's been a little over a year. I actually totally spaced out on my 1 year. I was like, oh, hey, hang on a minute. And then I wrote an email to my mailing list going, so, my business turned 1, and I totally didn't even notice. So
okay, I kind of did the same thing. So okay, so I'd love to know, because I know from your background, going from corporate to your, an entrepreneur must be such a different shift in your life. So what do you think are, like, what are the biggest lessons you've learned about yourself from this journey, like, in your first year? Because I know it's so challenging, and it's so many things come to us that we have to face, like, and we have to do the inner work, right? Because that's how we grow. So I'd love to hear what those lessons were for you.
Well, I guess there are a couple. I mean, in terms of the actual working from home element, I was already used to that, because I had managed to build in quite a bit of flexibility from that perspective in that job. For various reasons, we ended up with a quite a flexible arrangement for me. At some point, I actually got quite ill with my thyroid, and so I'd had a few months working at home, basically with my manager was like, okay, you can work from home, because it was too exhausting to actually go to the office. And this was before we'd had my son. And then afterwards I became a single mum, and I had to have that flexibility to be able to be at home and, work around my son. So it's actually been several years since I've had that opportunity to work from home and learn how I work from home. So that element, which is often challenging for many people who go from a corporate space into an entrepreneurial space, was not really a challenge, aside from the fact that my son just hates me working when he's around. He'd come and close my laptop while I was typing and things like that.
Is that just because he's like wanting your attention, I guess, because he's
yes, and I think when he was younger and I worked from home, he didn't really understand what was happening. So it's kind of, mum's just in that room and my grandma's here or whatever. So I used to work 2 days at home, and each of his grandmas would come and look after him one day each. And the other 2 days that I worked in the office. And so I'd take him to their houses, so that he was, being cared for by his family and everything. So he didn't really feel, as much as I can tell, like he was being neglected. But when he was at home and he got a bit bigger, he realized, there's something about this machine that, draws all her attention, and I don't want her to be playing with this machine. And, I want her to come and sit here and watch TV with, my grandma and me. So that's when it started, when he was a bit older. And then now he just actually says, "Mummy, I don't like your computer." So,
oh, bless.
So I try not to work when he's around, which is, fairly easy these days. But in terms of something that has been challenging is it was sort of emphasized to me the need that my brain has for structure. So, going from that space where you go to work and you have certain things that you have to do each day, and you have literally a job description, like a list of things that you are supposed to achieve in that position, to a place where pretty much everything is your decision to do. So there are people who work really well with that free flow, and they don't really need, a step-by-step thing or anything like that to help them to get their work done. Whereas for me, I realized, and it's not something that was new to me, it's something that I sort of every now and then would go, oh yes, I can't do that without structure, like learning. That's why I studied so many things, is because I was interested in them, and I knew that I needed that container to be able to learn and absorb the information, because I'd tried in other ways and didn't get anywhere. So when I started working at home as an entrepreneur, as opposed to as a corporate employee, I realized very quickly that I needed to create some kind of structure for myself to become productive, because it wasn't easy to just sit there and go, okay, I'm going to do this now. And then, in the middle of that, you just lose the concentration or the flow, or you have to go hang up the clothes or whatever, because you have to work alongside maintaining your home as well. So you have to somehow find a balance or create some boundaries. And it's a kind of, it's not something that you can just plan and then it magically happens like that, just because you decided that's how it's going to be. And it's it's quite it's a learning process, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying about that structure, because I think, and we've spoken about this before, but when we're multi-passionate creative women, or people in general, we have to find what works for us. And I think
exactly,
there's not one way fits all. As you said, you have that structure and you need that daily structure. And I know myself that I need, I'm lost without my morning routine. Otherwise I'm literally thrown and I can't think straight and I feel scattered. So I think as creatives, we've got to find what works for us. And as you said, it's like I actually think that a lot of creatives need some sort of structure to contain their creativity, but I don't think creatives like that word, structure.
No, they definitely don't.
Right? We've got to reframe that.
It does. I actually just did an episode about that last week. Yeah.
Point everyone towards that, because that I think is super helpful. And what I'd love to know as well, with the women you work with and help with their content, what would you say are their biggest challenges around writing and being creative? Do you see that challenge of them finding structure really difficult?
That's definitely one of the biggest challenges. And the same thing that you were saying around the whole structure is a thing that brings up resistance for a lot of them, because they are creative, they're spiritual, they want to go with their energy, they want to use their intuition and things like that, which is obviously a really good idea, because that's where you get your inspiration from. That's how you produce better content, because you're doing it when you're in alignment, when you've got the energy, when you've got the inspiration, right? Rather than trying to force yourself to create. So I totally understand and respect that. But at the same time, a lot of them find themselves quite overwhelmed when they try to do that and just sort of do this whole go with the flow thing, because often they think that simply having the energy or simply having an idea and following that idea at the time will somehow result in a piece of content that they are happy with. And often that's not the case. They'll create something and then go, oh, hang on, that's not really what I wanted to say, or, you know, it doesn't quite feel like what it felt like in my head, right? Or they start to write and all of a sudden they just become blocked. And what they often don't realize is that this idea of structure, whatever you want to call it, is something that can actually sort of mold that energy. So it's not so much, I do sometimes call it a container, because that is something that they resonate with, because they create their containers where they hold the space for whatever modality they use with their clients, or whatever service they provide is often within this form of some kind of container, whether that's a session or a group program or whatever it is that however they work. But the word container also can sometimes create this resistance that I don't want to be contained. I want to let my energy out. I want to let my ideas flow and all of this. So it's not about containing in terms of restricting what you're doing. The container is so that your ideas are not just bouncing out of your head and flying away, right? We want them to bounce out and then back in so that we can process them and understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. And then, you know, hone in on something and actually then move forward with that idea. So the challenge that I find with them is first of all, reframing this idea that structure is rigid, because it's not necessarily. And also helping them to realize that creating structure for their work is not like a one size fits all thing either, because they seem to feel, not all of them, but sometimes they go, you know, I don't want to have a process or a step-by-step thing. I don't want to, you know, limit the way that I can create. And it's not about limiting it. It's about finding what works for them and creating that particular container or that particular process for that person. So there are some people who know, okay, I am super creative in the morning, and so my thing is going to be I write my blogs in the morning. For me, it's so annoying, but I'm most productive at nighttime after my son has gone to bed. So I often go to bed really late, which is less than ideal, but I know that that's when I will take less time to do the same thing that I would be trying to do in like double the time during the day.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. Yeah. And then you've got other people who follow the moon cycles. I have a client who I helped create a content process based on moon cycles, aligning that with her program and the themes that she looks at in her program. So it really depends on how you work, you know, how your brain works, how you feel comfortable working, and then creating a structure around that so it supports rather than hinders what you're trying to do.
I love that, what you're saying, container. I think that's such a good word for it, because as you said, I think, I don't know whether it's the way we've been taught or something, that creatives almost, there's a sense of, you know, the people I work with too, that they have so many ideas, they just don't know what to do with them. And so they feel overwhelmed, as you said. And if they have that container, at least they have a direction to follow, you know,
Exactly.
unless otherwise they're just sat there procrastinating because they feel overwhelmed and stuck in that. And, you know, I love that you said about, I was going to say about working the moon cycles, because I, you know, help people connect with that in their natal chart and the moon, because I think as creatives, like you said, we've got to find what works for us. Like, we are unique, and what fits that woman over there is not going to fit, you know, you. So I think we as women need to build the connection, as you said, with the intuition part of us and our inspiration, but also having that safe space to do that in. And I know as a Capricorn, and you as a Capricorn, we've talked about this before, is we need structure, you know, like I need structure or some rituals to contain my creativity, as I'm just lost in a sea of ideas, which I don't know what to do with. So completely all over the place. So I know it's always helped me, but I've had massive resistance in the past, actually, kind of working with the other part of me that's fiery and needs that freedom. So it's kind of is balancing, I think, the freedom and the structure in some way. or reframing
Mm.
that, as you said.
It is. And it's really just a balance of the feminine and the masculine energies, really, when you're looking at it, because the free flow is the feminine energy wanting to just use the intuition and gut and all of that. And then the structure is the masculine element, which often, especially if we've come from a corporate background, is the thing that we're trying to get away from. And so we see structure synonymous with the thing that, you know, the evil corporate or whatever, you know. I'm not saying that corporate is evil, but, you know, some people feel like this, oh my God, I need to get as far away from it as possible. And
Yeah.
so they don't want to do anything that remotely resembles that. But the thing is that you need a little bit of that, because otherwise you're going to go around in circles, or you're going to end up overwhelmed because you have, as you said, no direction. What you
Yeah.
need is that the guidance that the structure gives you. It's not about, you know, restricting what you're trying to do, or, you know, stopping your ideas, or whatever people might think it does. It
Mhm.
actually helps you. And I think that that's probably part of what the resistance is that it's like the opposite of what they want to be. But until they're in that flow of, you know, overbalancing in feminine, that they realize, okay, something's not quite right here, and I don't know what to do about it. Or some of them do and realize, oh, actually I'm out of balance and I have to balance my energies. And some of them don't realize that that's what is happening. And so that's, you know, when they seek out help in some way, and start to realize, okay, there are things that I need to do. I need to create boundaries, I need to create structures or processes, or, you know, whatever rituals
Yeah.
to help them rebalance. Yeah.
I think that's so right what you said. And I love, you know, so for your, what wisdom, what advice would you give to somebody that has a sea of ideas, you know, and they they want to write some content? Because
Mm.
also I find that the creatives, and me myself have done this, is I literally will, this is me, I'll pull up a Word document and have all these ideas and start writing different things. And then
Mm-hmm.
I go back to and go, oh, that's a jumble of stuff. I'm not sure what it means, you know, what it, how it makes sense. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I finish some of them and, you know, use them as Facebook posts, but sometimes they just sit there, and I'll do a
Mm.
brain dump and things. But yeah, so what what advice would you say if somebody comes to you with these ideas? Like, where do you start with that? What do you do with that?
Well, often what the challenge is because they have so many things in their head, they cannot focus on anything.
Yeah.
So they don't want to lose their ideas, and that's why they keep thinking about everything. And so I will actually suggest something like what you just said, is to somehow get them out of their head. So that could look like just a brain dump in Word, or a spreadsheet with ideas that don't have to be fully formed. So, you know, there can be little wisps of ideas
Right.
that you just get them out, and then eventually they can turn into something. They may not, but
Mm.
they're out of your head. Or it could be, you could record a voice memo, or you could just write them in a notebook, whatever it is that works for you, because everyone, you know, learns differently and processes information differently. So the idea is you get them out of your head, and then there's not a jumble of ideas anymore. There is a concrete thing that you can, you know, tear up and move around and cross things off and link things together. It becomes a different way of processing that same information that was in your head, right? So the problem that I find most people have is the connection of ideas.
Okay.
And so if you cannot connect them, they're not going to turn into anything. And
Mm.
so when you start writing from that place of, I don't know where this is going, in terms of, you know, my idea is not concrete, right? So there's nothing wrong with starting to write and you don't know what the end is going to be like, because that can often lead to something really amazing. The problem is when you start trying to write something that you don't know what you're writing.
Right.
So when they start doing that, they're like, I don't like this because it's not going where I wanted it to go. Or, as you said, all these things don't really connect. I've written all these things and they don't really flow in one piece.
Yeah.
So once they have them out in some way that they can process them, it suddenly becomes easier to see the connections between things. So
Right.
you can say, okay, this idea goes with this idea, but this idea in the middle just totally doesn't make sense in this place. So let's separate that out. That's a different idea. It's a different piece of content that we can write. But these two things can go together,
Mm.
and they can start sort of creating a structure for the thing that they want to write, because they're not looking at how do I connect the things. Now they're seeing, oh, look, I can connect the things. How do I now elaborate on this connection?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like my base advice is like, okay, they can't live in your head because you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
That's how the overwhelm happens. It's the same thing as the mind chatter, right? When you're trying to do like mindset stuff, when you're trying to meditate or, you know, be grounded or whatever, and you've got like the mind chatter, it's exactly the same thing. So we need to quiet that before you can actually take the next step. The other challenge that I find is when they are working on their idea and they're writing the stuff and they try to edit it while they write.
I've done that.
Yeah. That's not the best approach for most people, because editing and writing are two different processes.
Right. Okay.
So you're actually making it take longer and you're stopping the flow of inspiration when you do that.
Yeah, that
So,
makes sense, because
yeah.
you've got this idea and I can see that I've done it and think, oh, I just tweak that bit. And then by the end, I'm completely lost what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's very distracting. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. So my advice when they do that is just write. It doesn't matter if it doesn't sound good. Okay. It's like the first draft. There's no such thing as writing the perfect piece of content without having to change a single word. It just doesn't happen. Even people who are famous writers have, you know, rewritten the same thing 50 times and then they get edited on top of that. So there's no such thing, right? Like, it may happen once in a blue moon, but it's not a thing that happens. Yeah. So don't feel the pressure of having to create the perfect piece straight away. Okay. Just write whatever comes out and then go back and read it and then rewrite it. And then, you know, get rid of bits that don't seem to fit or reword things or add things that are missing. But it's not about just a single process to create content. It is actually something that does take a little bit of time. And it will take less and less time as you become more practiced in doing it. But it is something that has different steps.
Love that. It's like building a new habit, you know, by not doing the editing and the writing. My hands up there. Need to change that habit. But I think it's the small processes, processes we take as creatives that will help us get to the point. Because I know you're all about, you know, being in a space of alignment before you write. So what is your advice on that? How do you advise people to get into alignment before they do their writing?
It will depend on the person, but often something that grounds them is really useful. So if yoga is their thing, maybe they can go and do a little bit of yoga and then they're in the right headspace of not worrying about all the other things, because it's kind of impossible to do yoga and, you know, be checklisting things that you're supposed to do later. And you know what I mean? Like it's about clearing the mind and having the body, you know, being in your body instead of being in your mind. So it could be something like that. It could be going for a walk. It could be having a cup of tea. It really depends on what you are like. Yeah. And sometimes people think, I'm in alignment. I feel good. I have inspiration. I sit down and then nothing happens. And they're like, I'm going to write anyway because I sat down here and I was, you know, filled with inspiration and now's my content writing time, and try and then go, okay, nothing's happening. That's okay. Just walk away. Come back. Yeah. No one said you had to write it right now. You know, like only you did that. And, you know, I've been guilty of this many times and sitting there going, I know, you know, I scheduled my time now for writing my thing and I have to write my thing. And then I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm clearly not going to get anything done.
It doesn't work like that, does it?
Watch Netflix. You cannot force it. No. It's not going to happen. And if you somehow manage to get something out, you read it and then go, I don't like that. Most of the time, you don't end up liking it anyway. Yeah. So, and especially if writing is not really your thing, you end up disliking it more and finding it harder and finding it more overwhelming and frustrating, because it's not something that, you know, comes easy to you in the first place. Yeah. So, you know, something like, for example, for me, it's like bookkeeping things that I have to do for my business. And I'm looking at it going, I don't like this program. I don't understand what is happening. I don't know what codes I'm supposed to put on this thing. And so in the end, I gave up and I made a spreadsheet. And so now it works. And my brain's like, okay, I understand what's happening now. Maybe it's not useful to the accountant, but like, you know, at least I found a way to do it. So it's really about saying, okay, instead of beating your head against the wall, find a new path because that's not blocked, right? Because like you're just going to keep walking and crashing into the thing instead of, you know, that fork in the road actually has nothing in front of it. So just like there's an alternative.
I
So
love
it's really just about finding, how do you feel aligned? How do you feel like you can tap into your intuition? Or how do you feel like you can overcome, like, the block of, writer's block? It
mm.
happens to everyone. So
Oh yeah,
even
I love that.
professional writers.
Yeah, yeah, totally, isn't it?
Mm,
I love that, like you say, getting into alignment, do something that's right for you, and also getting your body. I think that's key,
mm,
because so many creators, we have so many ideas, we're in our head too much. And I find
mm,
that when we ground ourselves, it actually helps you to be in tune with your emotions, and from that space you can connect. And
mm.
you're speaking, you're writing from your heart. I find that
Yeah,
helps as well. So
definitely.
the other part I'd love to know, because you talk about like the power of stories, and how I love this, because writing is, we are telling stories, and it connects us with our audience and our communities. So what are your tips around actually building a deeper connection with our communities and our you know clients? How do we do that through writing?
Well, the element of story is a really key tool that you can use. So when you're creating your content, most people talk about, I want engagement or I want reach, but what you really want is connection,
Mm,
because connection is what breeds those things. So sometimes you might, make a really amazing post and not a lot of people like it, no one comments on it, but you still somehow manage to reach someone. Just because somebody likes something, it doesn't mean they've actually read the whole thing, because they could just be scrolling on the Facebook feed and go, oh, that picture looks nice, click. And they haven't actually read what the post is about sometimes.
mm,
And some people don't like reading long posts as well. So they may have just posted because, they think, okay, I'm going to support my friend and like their post so that, it gets boosted in the feed or whatever, right?
mm,
And what I like to talk to my clients about is this idea that you connect through words, right? The words are a tool that you can use, especially online, to tell people what they need to know about you. So you want your clients to work with you. You want your audience to be converted into clients.
mm,
So they need to know how you can help them. And the only way you can tell them that is through content of some description. So most people will have at least some kind of written content in their Facebook page. You will have to have some kind of written content on your website if you have a website. It doesn't have to be written. It can be lives, it can be graphics, infographics, diagrams, whatever it is that is needed to convey that particular message or that particular piece of information. But using the element of story is something that creates connection naturally, because it creates characters and people can relate to characters. So it's not necessarily a story like often people will think story is like a fiction thing, right? So
mm,
story is just the sequence of events that happened, right? It's a recount of something that happened.
mhm,
So if we're using story synonymously with experience or with a situation that happened, you can see that story is actually just something that tells people a thing that happened, right? An event that happened, an experience or emotion, things about emotions that you have felt. And when in the process of telling that experience through
mm,
your words, you're creating a story that they can relate to. And
mm,
especially if you are conveying an experience that is something that is relatable, because most of them are, then people start to see themselves in the shoes of the character, whether that's you or the client that you have helped. And you're maybe recounting a case study. It doesn't have to be your story, right? It doesn't have to be a complete story either. It can be a part of a story,
mm,
right? It can be um, you could even do a fictionalized account of something that happened to someone or to you, if you need to protect confidentiality, or if you feel a bit vulnerable to share a particular piece of information or a particular experience. You can still use that element of story
mm.
to connect with those people, because they need to connect with the experience that was had,
Yeah, I love
right?
that, because I think, as you've said, I've done posts before and got no engagement, and I don't always look at the likes, etc. But the moment I tell my story, or a part of my story of what's happened to me, where I've struggled and how I've
Mm,
overcome it, people are always like, wow, like they start to connect, because they
mm,
realize it's almost like they see you're human, and that if you've
yeah.
overcome it, they can too. And that's
Mm,
where I notice the most connection. So I guess
mm,
I think as well, for creatives, you might see this as well. It's like they kind of fear being vulnerable online. You know, I think there's a real fear around telling their story because they're worried about being judged or, you know, criticized, whatever it is.
Mm.
But I like how you say you can tell it as from somebody else's point of view, that maybe it's not
Mm.
you, but it is, you know. So I love
Mm.
that maybe that's another way people can tell that part of their story, by saying she or this woman or something.
Mm.
I love that.
Yeah.
So do you, I mean, do you see that fear? Like what is the common, you know, is there a common fear or block that you see around these creative women actually sharing their stories out in the world?
Um, I think that one of the biggest ones is the fear of judgment,
Mm.
because I mean, the online space is a pretty harsh space. And there are people who will just be negative no matter what you share.
Mm.
And then there is this fear of, you know, opening too much of themselves up and having people see them differently. So, you know, they might not want their family to see something that they've written, or they might not want their friends to see that. And so, because a business page is a public space, I'm talking mainly about Facebook. Facebook is, you know, the place where I hang out the most. And so they don't post because that's a public thing. And as soon as someone that you're connected with posts on a page, it pops up in your feed going, this person posted this thing on this page. And
Mm.
even if you comment on someone else's page, you know, they've posted a post on someone else's page and you go and comment on that, it shows up on your connections feed that you commented on this person's post. So you can't get away from people on Facebook, right? So
Yeah, it's
one
pretty
of the
scary.
yeah, it is a little bit actually. And it's, I mean, you know, you think, you know, I need to buy this thing, and all of a sudden you've got like ads
Yeah,
about this thing.
it reads
It's
your
just
mind,
creepy.
Fred.
It is a little, yeah, it's a little bit scary. But I think that that's sort of the main thing, is this fear of showing too much of themselves.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a certain um, I'm going to say benefit, but I'm not talking about in terms of taking advantage of experiences or things that you've had, or, you know, milking them in ways that just don't feel good. But there is a certain connective element to being vulnerable and to sharing, you know, raw emotions and experience online. But on the flip side of that, it's not about just, you know, saying every single thing that happened and providing all these details and sharing every random thing that happens in your life. And it's not about coming here and saying, you know, I don't feel good today, but I'm going to do a live anyway. Or, you know, whatever experience that you had doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, broadcast.
Yeah.
It's about finding the elements of your experience that are actually of value to
Mm.
your audience, because then they can learn from that and they can understand why you would understand them and be able to help them.
Mm. So it's having empathy
And
as well, isn't
it
it?
is, it
Building
is,
that.
it's
I understand
absolutely,
what you're struggling. I've struggled with this, so I can
yeah,
help you as well overcome
exactly. And
challenge.
even if it's not the same experience, they can understand the um the fact that you have overcome some kind of obstacle.
Yeah.
So it's not about having the exact same experience as someone that you can help, but it's about showing them that you have the tools
Mm.
that they need so
Yeah.
that you can guide them
It's really,
through, you know, whatever service modality, whatever it is that you do.
it's really
Mm.
powerful. I think that is, it's key for
Yeah.
creatives. They need to share more of themselves. But as I said
Yeah.
to you the other day, I was a bit freaked out on my business page because my ex-boyfriend started watching my video. So yeah, it is a vulnerable place, Facebook, and
Mm.
I get it. I've been there, and I think sometimes it's not always easy. But if we just keep showing up as
Mm.
women, I think if we have that purpose and intention, you know,
Yeah.
content, then we will connect with people we want to work with. Um,
Yes, exactly.
so I'd love to know, because I know that you're multi-passionate, and you said that you'd love to go into you have a degree in publishing and you'd love to move your business in that direction. So I'd love to know what is your process for deciding like what ideas you focus on? Like what is your, because you need structure, as you said. How
Yeah.
do you go about that?
Well, it's a little bit it's a little bit funny. Um, I will often leave ideas half finished,
Mm-hmm.
because I call them star ideas, right? So I'll often have a lot of ideas, and I do what I've basically told you and all my clients is I find some way to record my ideas so I don't lose them. And then I focus on the thing that I want to focus on. But if I'm in the middle of a particular thing and then this other idea just pops up and I'm not supposed to be doing something else, whatever that else is, I'm supposed to be finishing XYZ, I sort of let that idea simmer a little bit. And then if it won't go away, then I follow that idea. And that's what I call a star idea, right? So is it a star that's going to, like just fade away and disappear? Or is it a star that's going to go supernova? And if you feel like it's going to be supernova, then you need to go and follow that idea. And that's what happened with the podcast. It just popped into my head one day and I thought, why won't this go away? Podcast is not really related to my business per se. It's not, something that I'm naturally comfortable with doing. Is just like, putting myself there and going with my voice. I'm an expert in blah, 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 right? So even though I'm talking a lot now and I talk a lot with people that I'm familiar with, people think I'm an extrovert, but I'm really not. So
Totally get you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also have performed a lot in my life, like with dancing concerts and various things. And then as soon as it's my birthday or something, people singing happy birthday, I'm sitting there going, oh my god, this is just like embarrassing. I don't know why, right? So it's really funny,
right? Tension on
yeah.
you.
It is, and it's really funny because that's exactly what happens when you're performing on stage. Like the attention, you're really the center of attention, and then all of a sudden it's the same thing, but it's really not the same, because when you're on stage, even if you're kind of someone else. It's a different context, and then when you're sitting there and someone's like talking at you about things that you've done, or when they do like embarrassing videos of you at your 21st or whatever, that kind of stuff, right? Some people are like, haha, they're so funny, I don't care. And I'm just like, oh my god. So,
it's isn't it? It's
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, but that's kind of how that podcasting happened. It was the idea that just wouldn't go away, and I thought, even though this is not really something I would naturally do, I sort of just followed that and thought, this is going somewhere. And I, learned a little bit about how do we do podcast things, what do we do before we start a podcast, blah, blah. And I started talking about it. It didn't exist yet. And I started talking about it. I created a page like they told me to. And I started doing posts and things and getting interest in a thing that didn't exist. And I thought, okay, well, this is clearly the right thing to be doing right now. And that's, I created that, and it is turning into something. And I think that that's sort of the most obvious way to me to know what I need to be doing next. And it's definitely an intuition thing. And sometimes it's really quite sharp and like I can tell, okay, yep, absolutely, I need to follow this. And sometimes it's sort of a little bit dull, and I think, I'm not sure if this is my intuition, if this is just something that I really want to do and I want it to be like a nudge, or if it's just my ego trying to distract me from something that I'm trying to do that I should be doing, and it's instead going, no, maybe you should do this because you'll be safe, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
I love that idea of the supernova and the star that's going to fizzle out. Such a great image, because I think, as you said, as we've been talking about, like creators, we have so many ideas that I see people start on this and then that, and they're doing 4 projects at the same time, and they're just so overwhelmed that I love what you say. If it's still there, follow that idea, and if it fizzles out, just leave it. And I think also to me, like you say about following your intuition, your body often feels it. I've started practicing this more and more, and I tell my clients to do this as well with the moon cycles and things. Is like, how do you actually feel? Does that idea feel like, make you feel expansive, maybe in your heart space, somewhere else in your body? Or does it feel like, no, like in your gut, and it feels restricting and like there's a knot in your stomach? And that's how it happens for me. If something's a bad idea, or just in general, my gut will tell me. But often we don't trust ourselves, or we don't listen to that part of us. So I really love that. Maybe there's a feeling behind that, as well as that you say it's gonna expand or it's not. And look at it, this podcast is incredible. You're interviewing all these incredible women, and it's happening easily, you know.
Yeah,
And
it
it
has
didn't
been.
have to be fully formed, as you said. It was an idea, and then it just evolved naturally. So I love that.
Yeah, it did. It's been so much fun too, just speaking with all these amazing people.
Great, beautiful. So, love to know, just like before we wrap things up, like what is your life vision? Because I know obviously your heart lies with the content and writing, but what is your ultimate vision that you want to create in your life?
Well, yeah, that's a long question to answer.
Well, the short version.
The short version. Well, I guess there's a lot of things that I want to do in my life, and I sort of don't know how many of them are going to come about, but I just know that there's going to be different things that I do in my life. I think the most sort of immediate one is what you were talking about before, is the shift back to sort of a more publishing based business, because I do have that background in terms of study and practical experience, and I love books, and I've always wanted to work with books and with people, crafting stories, whether that's my own or helping people craft theirs. And I think that as my business has evolved over the past year, from when I made the decision of, freelance writing is just not fulfilling me, to developing this idea of the content creation coach and helping people create their own content creation journey and something that works with them. I really resonated with that at the time, and I still really enjoy that, but it's not the end of the road for me. And so I've been sort of shifting back again to this idea, like books. How do I work with books? How do I find a way to work with books that feels aligned for me? Because even the traditional publishing house type of idea does not really feel right for me, because often they'll say, okay, you need to have market knowledge on this, and you need to have expertise in this genre, and all these things, right? Which obviously makes sense if you're going to be working in that kind of environment. But for me, it's like, I just like books, right? I may like several books from the same author, or books in a particular genre or whatever. I don't want to know what the market trends are. I want to know, how do books allow you to escape into another world? That's what interests me. Like, how do we craft the stories? How do we get the stories out there? So my journey at the moment is, how do I create a business around helping people do that?
Wow.
In a way that's not that traditional way, that's really based on a very small percentage of people deciding the merit of something, whether that should be published or not. And I know that's going to open up a whole debate around, self-publishing, vanity publishing, and that whole thing, which I understand in terms of, there still has to be some kind of element of quality, because there's a lot of stuff out there, especially now with the internet. There's just so many ways to get your content out there, and there's not a lot of controls in comparison. But I also believe that there's so much amazing content. There's so many amazing people and their stories and experiences that should be shared, because they could help someone else, and they could inspire someone or empower somebody else who might be in the place that those people had been in the past, and need the basically the map for getting out of that hole and into like a new phase in their life. So that's sort of what I'm working on at the moment, is, what's my business going to look like next year, and how do I bring that element of book publishing back into my life, because it's something I have done in the past. My ex-husband and I actually did a project over about 7 years, where we interviewed senior citizens. We had a small team of volunteers, and we interviewed senior citizens and basically captured their life stories or a particular experience or whatever they wanted to share in 3 volumes of oral histories. And then the proceeds of those books were basically donated to charity. And that is what really set me on the path of, one day I'm going to work with books somehow. I just don't know how. And that was about 10 years ago now.
Wow.
And I think that was the first time that I truly understood how empowering it is to have someone listen to your story, and to have your story preserved for someone else to learn from.
That's lovely. That's getting
Yeah.
goosebumps, so it must be a good thing.
Yeah. So
I love that vision, and also, you know, what you're saying about the supernova, you followed that idea of the podcast, so just follow this. I'm sure it will evolve to something else. And lots
Absolutely.
of people need your support with that. Take their stories out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I love that. So just to wrap up, is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to offer people, like creatives, to help them, you know, where do they even start with all this? You've given us loads of tips, but anything else that would help them on their writing journey?
I think it's, if you know where the inspiration comes from, it actually becomes a lot easier to write. So that's like eliminating the first obstacle, is I don't know what to write about. And so if you focus on things like your values, your passions, your gifts, the things that you know, your strengths, even your weaknesses, your qualifications, your experiences, there's literally inspiration everywhere. So anything that you've ever done can be a source of inspiration. It's what I call your soul elements, right? It's the things that have contributed to who you are now in any given moment. So when you draw on any of those things, you can create ideas for content. So that is why I talk about being in alignment, because when you're in alignment, you can see the woods through the trees, right? You can see that, you know, oh, there's actual things that have happened in my life that I can talk about. Whereas when you're not in alignment, you're like, I got to write content. I don't know what to write about. There's a completely different approach to writing. So I think that would be sort of my biggest tip, is like, don't despair that you don't know what to write about, because you do, right? And even if you are not a good writer, or even if you are one of a million Reiki masters, or, you know, whatever, website designers, no one is you.
Yeah.
No one is going to talk about the same thing in the same way as you. So, you know, and people will resonate with different people. It's just going to happen that way. Not everyone can serve everyone else.
Love that.
So knowing who you are and the things that make up who you are, how you show up in life and how you show up in business, is going to make it easier for you to decide what you share in terms of your content.
Love it. And breaking it down, like you said, just makes it easier, because we're all unique, as you said.
Yeah.
So how can people, I will leave all the links below the video, but how can people work with you? What's the best way to reach out and connect with you?
Well, I'm mostly on Facebook in terms of social media. I do have Instagram, but I kind of forget that it's there. So you can check out my Facebook page, which is at Romina Bespoke Content, and just private message me through that. Or you can look at my website, which is just rominacavagnola.com, and just, you know, check out that information. If you have any questions, you can reach out. And I also have my podcast, obviously, which is Alchemy of Alignment, which is on Anchor, and that gives you links to the other platforms that it's on, including Spotify. And I'm sort of in the process of getting it put onto other places, so that's available.
Exciting. And
Yeah.
honestly, do check out Romina's podcast, because it's amazing. There's so many inspiring interviews on there. You're doing a great job. So check it out.
Thank you.
Can't wait to listen to more of them. I'm hooked.
There'll be more coming up soon. I had a little break because of the move, but now I've got a lot of recordings
You're doing
to
a lot, I know.
put on there.
Great. Well, so it's been so lovely connecting and chatting with you and hearing all about your vision and your wisdom. So thank you for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. It's been really fun. And it's always fun to chat to you anyway, but it's been just really nice diving into all that, and and just elaborating on alignment and creativity.
Talk about this for hours.
I think we could, yes.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks, Romina, and take care.
Thanks, Anna.
Bye.
Bye.